Welcome to the fourth episode of the Communication and Behavior Change Accelerator. In this session, we will explore how to generate support by communicating water as a solution. What are the key considerations to communicating water as a solution, and how can water-based solutions be communicated in terms of development issues and climate change? To start the discussion, I would like to introduce a talk from John H. Matthews, who is the Executive Director of Alliance for Global Water Adaptation.
Hello, my name is John Matthews. I've been working in climate and water issues since 2003. Today, I'd like to challenge the way you talk about climate change, and maybe the way you read and engage with the media around climate issues. About 10 years ago, I was in China, working with local colleagues in Shanghai. A prominent US environmentalist was on a book tour. My local colleagues invited him to address the public on a variety of issues. I'm going to call him Dr. Doom. Climate change was one of the drivers that he focused on, how China was investing in energy, how it was pursuing its development trajectory, how to avoid climate catastrophes. I'd been working on climate adaptation issues by that point for about 4 years already. After his talk, there was a group dinner, and my colleague seated me next to him, even though I was relatively junior and he was quite famous. He asked what I worked on. Climate adaptation and water, I said, and there is so much good work that is happening here in China, especially with some of the people that are here in this room. And I leaned back to show him some of my colleagues and tell him about what they were working on. But he stopped me and he leaned in close and he whispered, "It's all pretty depressing. I mostly feel despair. I don't hold out much hope." And my thought was, you haven't been hiding your feelings very well. I had a new son then, one I hadn't met yet. My wife and I were adopting, and we were about 4 or 5 months out from meeting him. Dr. Doom's despair really concerned me. Since then, because of my work, I estimate that I've at least skimmed some 28,000 articles on climate impacts, climate science, climate adaptation over the past decade. Dr. Doom's despair is, in my experience, being communicated through a lot of media sources. Most of the climate news is something I call climate change porn, which tells us about the horrible things that are happening that we can't do anything about, that we can't avoid, about our lack of choices, our lack of the ability to move forward. I will also add that this is not just a journalism issue. I'm a climate scientist, and it's an issue with many scientists and how they talk about climate change, as well as technical and policy decision makers. We often avoid talking about how we can avoid or reduce risks, about what alternate futures might look like. Consider a few headlines as an example. The first is a quite typical one, talking maybe a little extreme in its phrasing. Are Africa's aging dams doomed? Next, we have a recent interview with Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General of the UN, talking about the climate change crisis in such bleak terms. We are coming to a point of no return. Then Paul Ehrlich, he's a US environmentalist, arguably one of the most important for the past 60 years, declaring just about a year ago that the collapse of civilization is a near certainty within decades. And lastly, the IPCC's forthcoming report has been leaked recently, and an article that appeared in The Guardian says something that is really dramatic. Life on Earth can recover from a drastic climate shift by evolving into new species and creating new ecosystems. Humans cannot. The worst is yet to come, affecting our children's and grandchildren's lives much more than our own. I'm a climate scientist, as I said, and I'm telling you that this is not written in stone in the climate science. So why do these issues matter? Who is hearing the despair? 2 years ago, my son was 9. His teacher reached out to ask if I could talk with his class about climate change. She said they seem worried about it, very aware of climate as an issue, but I'm not really sure how much they really know. I was really curious too. So one Friday afternoon, I stopped by the teacher had passed out earlier in the day blank maps of the Americas, and she'd asked the kids to simply draw what they thought the future was going to look like in 2030. No other instructions. When I got there, a girl raised her hand really eagerly, and she wanted me to see her map. She'd colored in Brazil bright red. She said, "That's because the Amazon has all burnt up." A boy came next with Canada colored brown and gray. He said, "That's because of the ice is gone." And another boy had drawn little circles where there were mountains in North America. And he said, "These are the only pieces of land that are sticking up above the ocean." The teacher and I looked really hard at each other. The level of anxiety in these 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds was intense. And they are in a wealthy, safe country. It says a lot about how they feel about the world, about their future. And what are we communicating to them? What are we telling children about how to invest in their own lives, much less to feel about the community we feel as a world? I think we're telling them that any form of climate change is inevitably loss and disaster. We're telling them they cannot influence their own future, that they cannot see their role in choosing alternative futures. I do not believe that narrative. I believe we can shape and define our shared climate future, and most of that narrative is about water. In contrast to the media I consume for over a decade, my organization, the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, or AGWA, has engaged with people all over the world to develop and demonstrate and go to scale with practical solutions, even when they're bold and hard to implement. Our vision is that the decisions we make as water professionals are also critical to developing long-term climate solutions. Our job is to define water resilience and then get water resilience right. No one else is going to do it but us. We know that water is embedded in our transport systems, our energy, our food systems, healthcare, our ecosystems. And adaptation for all of these sectors is based on water resilience. We are necessary. Our message is that we can get ready and we can do better. We can prepare our children and our grandchildren, and they need us to get it right. Anxiety doesn't solve problems. It doesn't promote solutions. In contrast to most climate media, I'd say AGWA's message sounds like a radical vision. My message to you is that our words around climate change matter, and they especially matter for those of us who are working on water. The institutions and agreements, the policies, the infrastructure that we use for water last over climate-relevant timescales. We know how to design all of these for resilience, to help us prepare for climate impacts, to help us build a better world. A few months after I met Dr. Doom, my wife and I flew to the Horn of Africa to pick up our son. He was 9 months old. Our agency asked us when we arrived if we wanted to meet his birth mother, who lived in the far south. This is a photograph of my son at that time. After a 2-day drive, a very young woman met us in a dark room in a dusty little town. Our first question was, why? And she said, "My mother's dead. I live alone with my father. We're really poor, and my fear is that we're going to have a drought and we will have to choose who can eat. And I wanted to choose instead a better life for him." A few weeks later, back home in the US, I was scanning climate articles, and I saw that we were in the early stages of a very severe, very powerful El Nino cycle. And I gaped a little bit, because what that meant typically is when we have a strong El Nino, that means that there is a severe drought in the Horn of Africa. And that year, we saw the worst drought there in 4 decades. It was quite a severe famine, actually, in some regions. Our son's birth mother chose his future well, even if it was a hard choice. This is our son, Austin, today. I'm not saying that we should give up on a massive energy transition. I'm not giving up on climate mitigation. But the science says that we have a lot more climate change to come, no matter what happens to our energy policy. I'm saying we have to communicate the future that we are already committed to, and that we have options and choices. That message is about bending our narrative from collapse to how to build and implement water resilience. And ultimately, I think it's about how we choose hope in a time of change. Thank you very much.
Thank you to John for that moving and engaging presentation. So I will now introduce your colleagues in the panel. Leslie Porras, you are the Manager of Sector Strategy at water.org. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Carl Ganter, the co-founder and director of Circle of Blue. Hi, Carl.
Hi, everybody.
And Christelle Quisera, the founder of Water Access Rwanda, and also you won the Cisco Youth Leadership Award given out by Global Citizen. Hi, Christelle.
Hi, everyone.
And hi also to you, John. Welcome to the panel. So, John, you talked about bending the narrative from collapse to how to build and implement water resilience. So what do you others in the panel say? Do you agree that we must change the narrative from doom to boom about water issues? And if so, how do we achieve that? Leslie, you want to start?
Sure, happy to. I think there's a really delicate balance in communicating the urgency of action, right? We need to help people understand that the urgency is there, but we need to do it in such a way that doesn't paralyze them and make them think that things are hopeless, and that their actions can't actually have some kind of impact. If people hear too much doom, they think we are doomed and their actions don't matter. They withdraw. So people need to be inspired by stories of success. They need to maintain their hope and optimism that we can still make a difference and that we're not doomed yet.
Thank you. And Christelle?
Yes, I completely agree. There is a delicate balance, but I do believe when you focus on the boom part, it's more aspirational. It gives power back to the individual decision maker and less to the bigger organizational governmental decision maker. So in our case, when you think about water, for so long it's been sold as just a solution to poverty, or sometimes sold through images of very sad or poor Africans. But once you introduce a narrative of convenience and aspirational self-development, you really put the power back into the users, and you see so much more happening. You see more development happening because, whoever sold Coca-Cola for its solution to global issues, but we drink it for the aspirational message it brings to us, which is, drink this, be happy. The more we can switch to the boom kind of messaging, it's more aspirational. It motivates the users to action instead of paralysis, as Leslie touched on.
Thank you. And Carl?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. And the language matters. And coming from the journalism world, we're motivated by visible moments, and so is the media. And just a couple little historic points is, if you think back to in the U.S. in the late 60s, the EPA was formed when we had a cascade of events. We had rivers on fire. We had oil spills. It become really so visceral that politicians and decision makers had to act quickly. So it's that doom to boom piece that you mentioned. A few weeks ago, the IPCC report came out. Very doom. And that's, in a sense, the same metaphor of the rivers on fire. And so this is the moment. And one thing I think that when we go from doom to boom, we have to seize moments. Like, again, a couple weeks ago, that IPCC report, where is or where was the water sector in seizing that moment and really asserting that relevancy. Here's the doom part, but then here's that adaptation and that mitigation and the investment and all these other pieces that are really, really exciting responses. So that's, I think that's seize the moment is my biggest point.
John, what do you say after hearing the others?
There's so much that I am excited to hear in the reflections of my colleagues here in the panel, that I think this idea, especially that Christelle's made, this point that she's made about how we need to think about aspiration. I think the other aspect of showing about the aspiration, the hope, is also showing what it looks like on the ground, showing the difference in our reporting, our journalism, our communications, about the difference between what we have been doing in the past and what a more resilient, climate adaptive future looks like. As a very quick example, in the U.S. state where I live in Oregon, for much of this summer, for really much longer than a month, there's been a gigantic forest fire. It's called the bootleg fire. And the presumption, it's really reported, just as I described in my talk, as kind of climate porn, that it's unprecedented. The people describe the size of the fire, the presence of fire tornadoes. I mean, it sounds like a scene from Lord of the Rings in most of the reporting. But there's no next step in that. And if you talk to the state and federal agencies, many of the landowners, their presumption is that after the fire, our job should be to simply replant the forest. And I would argue that's replanting the risk. That's not the resilience message. What we actually should be doing is taking this as an opportunity to see that these ecosystems, that this landscape is actually in the process of transforming into a new state. And that's that actually changes the whole context from this is loss and disaster to saying, actually, we need to work, this is an opportunity to work with nature into a new state and think about how we can make sure that gigantic fires like this don't happen again in the same place in another 10, 20, 50 years.
And going back to sort of, is it a framing issue? I mean, Christelle, you founded the Water Access Rwanda, but at the start, I understand the incentive was to do something about youth unemployment. So how do you frame your message about your work? Is it about solving a water problem, or is it about creating employment and development?
Yeah, in terms of framing, for me, I usually describe it like a mathematical equation, 2 negatives, 1 positive. And in this case, we have 2 input problems, the water crisis, youth unemployment. And really, if we create more jobs in creating water infrastructures, we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're solving 2 issues in one go. And so focusing more on the solution and how it affects multiple problems, I would say it's kind of that framing issue where, especially as entrepreneurs, we look at challenges as opportunities to provide a solution. If you go to the market and you have a product that nobody wants, that's a sure way to lose money. But if somebody needs your product, that means they have a challenge that you're addressing. But you're not going to found a company just talking about your problem. If you're making a pitch deck, the problem is usually just one slide. The rest of the slide is like, okay, look, the solution we're offering, look how amazing it is, look at the traction we're getting. So it's really about that framing, but also, directing people to see, yes, there is a problem. This is how big the problem is. This is how it affects different aspects of our lives. But this is now how the solution comes in. And these are the different wins the solution can give us. Beyond that one singular issue, this solution could influence so much more than what we set out to do. So it is a framing issue, I would say. But again, the people hearing this see 2 different messages. Some are inspired to join that action, to implement more of that solution, while some may lose hope or also be called to innovate as well to solve the problem that you have. But I do believe, everywhere I go, people tell, Christelle, you're inspirational. I never really get why. But when I realize the way I also see the world and think about issues and challenges, they are just opportunities to innovate and propose solutions. So once you see it that way, it's a way of thinking, of framing issues that really pushes me and everyone else in the company and everyone else who hears our message. It moves them to action. It's like, yes, there is an issue, but hey, that means there is need of people to solve the issue, and this is where you come in. It's definitely, I would say, a framing issue as well.
So 2 negatives make a positive. What do you others say about that?
Yes, so 2 negative issues, we could combine them and get something positive. And it's kind of the way we talk also about climate action. When you think about just, it's this doom and so on, people are going to lose jobs, they're going to lose their homes and so on. But then you think about, like, if we implement all these climate solutions, we're creating massive jobs. It's a massive opportunity to innovate and move the world forward. It's a massive opportunity for researchers. So once you see it that way, yes, there is a challenge, but there's also, because of the massive challenge, there's also this massive opportunity to create new jobs, to innovate, to bring the world forward by responding to this challenge.
Carl, as a communicator, what do you think about this framing? How important framing is for the issues?
I think it's incredibly important. And I think also what you just laid out here too, Christelle, was really, really important. The other part of that too is when we frame the story and we talk about storytelling, we also need to talk about listening better. And so when we're using social media and we're using our platforms, we need to understand where are people. So John, when you talk about the forest fires, out west in the American West, where are they? What's the polling tell us? What's their sentiment? Are they scared? Are they willing to step up? What do they need to hear? And also the same thing from our journalists and building those relationships in that storytelling, so that when we are telling our stories, that it's bi-directional, that we're also listening to what's working, but we're also really focused on the relevancy. And I come back to that moment of relevancy, whether it's a forest fire, a report, anything else. We have these moments, we have these kind of stargates that open, that we can shine the light on the issue and then also shine the light on the solution. And that, I think, is what people are looking for. Where am I in this picture? Do I actually fit? Do I take a shorter shower, or do I call my congresswoman? How do I respond? And I think the language is really key. And I think having that, okay, this is a scary situation. This is a moment in history where we're all going to pull together. This is our shared vision. And now this is what we do about it.
I think I'm just jumping in as a quick response to follow up on that. I mean, I think my focus is obviously on climate change and water, and we could talk about kind of water more generally. But I think Carl's point is spot on that especially most of the journalism that's taking place, it's starting to change a little bit, but it's very slowly. It really focuses on those two problems, and it doesn't focus on the solution. It's just the double negative that Christelle is talking about. And I think the key three letters in the news are new in most cases. And often what that means is the event that we're looking at. But the positive part is often about something that's really different than we're doing that we need to be doing in the future. And that's a more general water issue. Often we're asking people to make, those of us in the water community, we're asking people more generally to make a significant change in behavior. And from my point of view, in terms of climate, there are very few organizations, there are very few institutions that understand in a realistic way what water resilience looks like. And I think that's a practical challenge. I think the journalists themselves are still really confused by that. And so they themselves don't really know what that one positive thing or small packet of positive things should be to say, because they have a very small sample size in their experience. But I think that's actually where we need to re-engage with journalists in a different way than we have with some of these emerging issues that really require a much more kind of innovative approach about trying to find at least one strong positive recommendation that we're asking for from people.
So, Leslie, you work with different target groups. At water.org, you work with improving access to safe water and sanitation through affordable financing. So you work with financial institutions, partly. And so how do you demonstrate the value of water to them, to financial institutions, and in your communication?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And it's funny because something that those of us who are really embedded in the water sector take as very obvious is actually quite difficult to communicate. And so when you're talking to financial institutions, primarily they're thinking about return on investment, and they're not looking for the social outcomes or the health outcomes that speak to so many of us and actually, motivate so many of us to action. And what you have to, and I should take a step back and say that water.org's method is to approach financial institutions who are already lending in countries where people don't have as much access to water and sanitation. And we convince them to offer dedicated loans for water or for sanitation access to low-income households. Now, they're used to lending to low-income households, but they're used to doing this for income-generating purposes. So when we approach them and say, we want you to establish water connection loans or toilet construction loans, they think we're crazy because they don't see how a poor family could actually repay a loan from a toilet. They don't see income and toilets as connected. And so part of our communication message and strategy has to be to really show them the business case and how having access to these items is fundamental at home. How much income is lost, or how much time can somebody not be working when they're sick themselves because of a waterborne illness or because they're caring for somebody else in their family who is ill? How much lost opportunity is there in terms of education if somebody cannot go to school because they're sick, caring for somebody who's sick, or they're just genuinely taking the time to collect their water or go outside to defecate? It's making these connections between this access to these basic needs and health and the implications upon income. When you can do that, you can find we're a lot more effective. And at this point, water.org has a lot of data that we can also then use to help communicate that message.
And what change do you see in the attitudes when they implement these kinds of loans?
Well, in general, our repayment rate across 151 financial partners across 11 different countries right now is 99%, right? So the fact that there is really low default on this, and that's a real number, it's not made up. A lot of people question me about that. Helps them understand, oh, wow, these things matter to people and they do repay them. They also see this in terms of the way that their clients respond to them and come back to them for more and different types of loans, especially when they have been able to build their own income opportunities through actually having these critical foundational needs being met and no longer having to worry about them.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Any reactions to what Leslie just told from?
Yeah, I was going to jump in too. I think it's spot on too. Is the fact that we need to talk more about the why. In the water world, we love to get to the how and the what, like right away, but we need to frame that why, and there are a lot of different ones, and for different audiences. And I think we really, really need to be laser focused on that. So you're talking about the finance world. Why? Why do they care? And it's beyond CSR. This is not just a CSR budget. This is entirely scalable. And there's a really good why right there.
Yeah, and I would agree that it's been quite hard. And sometimes making that transition from a community that's really sort of operated in the sort of public health space to transition to speaking to financial actors has been a huge learning curve that is still ongoing, and anyone within my peer group would agree with me on that. But we are getting better.
So, John, going back to your story about Mr. Doom, what sort of examples of solutions to climate change could you have used to sort of persuade him, or was it possible? And how do we raise the importance of water as a solution to climate change or other environmental issues?
It's a fantastic question. So, Dr. Doom, I'm not sure that there's much that I could have done to help him, except maybe suggest an early retirement and some strong medication. I definitely don't think the Shanghai wine was helping him that evening. I think in terms of what we need to be able to see is in terms of very practical examples, very practical solutions, is trying to make really clear, echoing some of the earlier comments, that water resilience in general is something that's not an environmental issue. It's actually a core economic issue, and that there are really fundamental reasons just for our continued prosperity and economic growth, continuity of operations and institutions, that we need to bring this in very practical ways. So the example I used earlier about the bootleg fire in Oregon, I think is actually relevant. Maybe this is also echoing a comment that Christelle talked about earlier about how we frame an issue. We need to be able to see the problem clearly, and often I think if we frame, say, climate change as purely an environmental issue, then we're not seeing it as something that all of us need to be working on in many aspects of our daily work and our daily endeavors. So, if the solution to the bootleg fires, if we go back and we replant trees, then I would argue that it is a fundamental lack of vision that we see in what the problem of Western fires in North America or in Queensland, Australia, or in Indonesia is. It's about transformation. Our theory of change actually has to be fundamentally different. So, and if you say that this is actually a shift into a new state, something that I think is argued very passionately in the latest assessment report from the IPCC, that actually it tells you, well, we need to think about what those ecosystems are going to look like. We need to find the communities and the economies that are dependent on the ecosystems being the way they are now, and help them transition to the new state. It's a completely different kind of a vision and an approach to identifying the problem, and that leads you to saying, well, we need to make sure that these communities have livelihoods that can move forward into a different way. We need to make sure that their water, their energy systems, even their data systems are able to transition into new states, and that it completely changes the conversation and the focus of our activity and work.
John, you also talk about in your talk, you spoke about young people being worried and depressed about their future. And we see that a lot. There's worries about climate change and the future. So what messages do you think should be communicated to them? Christelle, what do you think?
For me, I would think it's a message of hope. Generally, I would say I'm a little bit more exposed to the solution side. I'm a very optimistic person in general. So I tend to see more of what's happening rather than what is not happening. What I would think the message of hope for young people is that there is solutions. There's just a lot of gaps in terms of how do we get those solutions to scale and make them work for more people. So to all young people out there, look up the solution. There are plenty, there are many warriors stepping up for Earth. Find one of them, be one of them, and make sure that these solutions that we do know can work, we're actually scaling them and making sure they're adopted at scale.
Thanks a lot, Christelle. And Leslie?
Yeah, I would build on what she said, and I would say that the future is bleak, but it is not hopeless. Right? People all over the world are seizing the opportunities that they have to solve their water and sanitation challenges. Organizations like my own, but a lot of others are really evolving to meet the emerging, to meet the problems that are happening. And I think that actually means that the time right now is truly ripe for all of the youth out there to really get involved and join us and be a part of the global community that is seeking and developing these solutions, right? If we give up on everything now, we're condemning ourselves to that doom that we all fear. But if we take action now, we can help ensure that we bring all of the best minds to the table, create new approaches to these old challenges, and actually move forward together.
Thank you. Carl?
Yeah, I was going to say too, and we need to make it exciting. I mean, I hate to say, this is a story that's yet to be written, and it is a drama that we're all living, right? And we know what kind of ending we want to write. And so if we even look at the Apollo mission and look at Kennedy when he stepped up and said, we choose to go to the moon, that was driven by fear. That was driven by fear of beeping Sputnik satellite that you could tune in any radio and hear the beeps from the Sputnik satellite. It was terrifying for our parents. And so we need to characterize this as that this is a winnable, exciting adventure. And then we need to provide that collective dream. And so whether it's jobs in the engineering for young people, whether it's communications, whether it's all the different pieces of this water puzzle, we need to make that hope visible, because right now I do tend to feel that we're stuck a bit in the status quo, and we need to feed that hope, because the moon was impossible until Kennedy really gave us. He didn't say what we were going to do or how we were going to do it. He said why, because we choose to do this. This is the most important thing that we can do for ourselves and the planet, is to define new horizons. So we have to make it exciting.
Thanks, Carl. And finally, John.
Maybe to follow up on JFK, he also said, we choose to do this because it's the hard thing.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is a really key message. In Agua, I like to hire young people. I'm often have young people reach out to me, especially in COVID times, reach out by email or on LinkedIn with often quite moving questions, and I see my son every day as an example of what it is that we need to be working for. I also think it's in many ways youth, young people, even children, in a way they see the climate challenge with fresh eyes, with actually quite realistic eyes. I'm not sure that I would go so far as to use Leslie's word about bleak, but they see that climate change is a very serious issue, and they also see that most of us have not done very much, and then from the media they're not hearing this sense that there are useful things that we could be doing. I think for them our message actually needs to be really strongly that there are powerful, effective things that they may be hard, that they may be asking a lot from us, but that this is the important work. I need to know, as someone that is going to be retiring in 15 years, that there's going to be somebody after me that's going to pick up the stick after me and take it from my hand and keep moving forward. And to view this realistically as a multi-generation, as a long-term, serious problem, but also a problem that we can do something about, is so important. And that, to me, to not just pass it off and say that this is something that is a quick fix, it's really easy, we do these 3 things and we're done. No, this is our work. This is our work as a species for centuries now. And that, I actually think, that will help relieve the anxiety. It will validate the anxiety that youth, that children, that young professionals feel and that they know, but it will also give them a path that says, I know that I can have hope. I can have kids. I can have a family. I can embed myself in my community and in the world and the global community in a realistic and useful way.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for participating in this panel discussion and share with us some insights and ideas for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our lead partner, the Grundfos Foundation. Don't forget to look at More Than Words, showcasing effective storytelling on water, and where visual and performing artists address urgent climate and water issues. You can find these events on the center stage. Join us again tomorrow for the 5th episode of the Communications and Behavior Change Accelerator. Thank you for watching.